Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today to join the debate on C10, the Safe Streets and Communities Act. I've been very glad to see the vigorous debate that's taken place in this House, of course, over the past few days, and of course, over 79 hours of debate which took place in the previous Parliament. Mr. Speaker, as we know, the Safe Streets and Communities Act is a piece of comprehensive legislation, that is made up of 9 separate bills. And I've heard my honourable colleagues from the opposition question the rationale of bundling this important piece of legislation together. And I'd like to speak to that point. Since taking office, our government has made no secret of the fact that we will stand up for the safety and security of Canadian families. We have been clear that we will ensure victims are heard and that victims are respected. And we've been clear that dangerous criminals belong behind bars and not in the streets where they can harm law-abiding Canadians. The Safe Streets and Communities Act and every piece of legislation within it is about fulfilling those commitments to Canadians. This is not the first piece of comprehensive legislation that our government has introduced. We are very proud to have delivered the Tackling Violent Crime Act back in 2008, an act that has now been law for some period of time. And you will recall, Mr. Speaker, that the Tackling Violent Crime Act strengthened the criminal code in a number of ways. It delivered tougher mandatory jail time for serious gun crimes. It established new bail provisions which require those accused of serious gun crimes to show why they shouldn't be kept in jail while they were awaiting trial. It protected youth from adult sexual predators by increasing the age protection from 14 to 16 years of age. And it ensured more effective sentencing and monitoring to prevent dangerous high-risk offenders from offending again and again and again. It also made new ways to detect and investigate drug-impaired driving, as well as stronger penalties for impaired driving. Now, much like the Safe Streets and Communities Act, all of the provisions had been pieces of previous legislation that had been blocked in political games by the oppositions prior to 2008. But our party and our government believe so strongly in this action that we did what was in the best interest of Canadians. We bundled them into a comprehensive package known as the Tackling Violent Crime Act. And on top of this, we made that act an issue of confidence in this House. And now we find ourselves, after the May 2nd general election, in a similar position with Bill C-10, the Safe Streets and Communities Act. And as you know, this past spring, Canadians gave us a strong mandate to move forward with our law and order agenda. As part of the Conservative election platform, we made a commitment to move quickly to reintroduce legislation that had been blocked or opposed by the opposition. It has always been a point of pride, Mr. Speaker, that this government delivers on the promises we make to Canadians. And that is why we have done as we have promised, and why we are standing here today debating the Safe Streets and Communities Act. And now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to talk a bit about the principle of protection of society. Now, what exactly does that mean? In short, it means that when courts and government officials are making decisions, the first thing they will now consider is how will those decisions affect the greater society. It may come as a surprise to many Canadians that when it comes to the transfer of offenders, the protection of society is not currently the principle of consideration. We are currently in a situation where the Minister of Public Safety is compelled to look at a number of factors when considering whether a prisoner should be transferred back to Canada. In fact, currently the Minister is restricted in the considerations that can be taken into account when he's looking to transfer offenders. Bill C-10 will change that. This bill provides additional factors that the Minister of Public Safety may consider when determining whether to grant an offender's request to serve their sentence back in Canada. In doing so, it clarifies one of the key purposes of the International Transfer of Offenders Act, and that is to protect the safety of all Canadians. This ensures that Canadians and their families are safe and secure in their communities and that offenders are held accountable for their actions. And Canadian families expect no less. Now, let me give you a few additional examples of what the Minister can consider when considering whether an offender should be transferred back to Canada. For example, he will consider whether the offender is likely to endanger public safety. He will consider whether the offender is going to keep engaging in criminal activities. And he will consider whether the criminal will endanger the safety of Canadian children. This legislation will also allow the Minister to consider, among other things, is the offender cooperating with rehabilitation and local law enforcement, and has the offender accepted responsibility for their actions. This means that now when a minister makes a decision about whether an offender is transferred back to Canada, he has the ability to look at a broad range of factors that go beyond what is simply in the best interest of the offender, but to ensure protection of Canadian society will come first. Mr. Speaker, these proposed changes to the International Transfer of Offenders Act are among important changes contained within the Safe Streets and Communities Act. Others include better protection for our children and youth from sexual predators, increasing penalties for organized drug crime, preventing serious criminals from serving their sentences from the comfort of their own living rooms by ending house arrest for serious crimes. It also will protect the public from violent young offenders and eliminate pardons for serious crimes. It will increase offender accountability and support the victims of crime, and it will protect vulnerable foreign nationals from abuse and exploitation. Mr. Speaker, these are all measures in which our government strongly believes in. And that's why we promised Canadians we would bring them forward swiftly after the election. And that's why we've now introduced the Safe Streets and Communities Act. And it's also why we are hopeful that members of the opposition will do the right thing and support this important legislation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. L'honorable député de Terrebonne-Blainville.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, ma question pour mon collègue, c'est que il a parlé justement de la partie de ce projet de loi qui parle de la transfert international des prisonniers. Par contre, je sais que la communauté internationale, surtout les États-Unis, nous ont parlé contre ces mesures, car ça donne trop de juridiction au ministre de choisir qu'est-ce qu'il va faire avec si ce prisonnier peut être transféré ou non. Donc, j'aimerais que mon collègue commente sur les réactions de la communauté internationale. Merci.
The honourable member for Cumberland, Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Well, you know, we can always listen to people all across the world and comment on the laws and legislation we pass here in Canada. But I think you might have noticed today Canada was selected as the top nation in the world. The top nation in the world. And that's because people have a positive feeling about our country. So, you know, we can listen to what people all around the world say, or we can listen to the victims of crime in this country. That's who we're going to listen to. That's who our government listens to. Yeah. And you know what? We're going to stand up and fight to protect the families of this country.
Questions and commentaires. The honourable member for Charlottetown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The United States Supreme Court has declared that overcrowding in United States prisons to the extent of 137% results in conditions within their prisons that are cruel and unusual punishment. The overcrowding rate in prisons in British Columbia is now at 200%. This legislation is going to pack provincial institutions to a greater degree, and undoubtedly you're going to be faced with charter challenges. What measures does the government plan to take to deal with overcrowding in provincial institutions as a result of bringing in this law?
Honourable member for Cumberland, Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member opposite for his questions. And what's important to remember is that our government is investing both in the expansion of federal prisons, and we are also supporting our provinces with investments in their justice systems. There's been no government in this country previous that has done as much to invest and support our provinces in the area of justice as the Conservative Party of Canada. We will continue to do that. We will continue to work with our provincial partners and ministers of justice across this country to make sure our communities and our people are safe.
Questions and comments. L'honorable député de Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question to the honourable member for Cumberland, Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley. I recently came across a report from the Department of Justice of the Government of Canada from January 2002, an expert report which pans the idea of mandatory minimum sentences, concluding that it could be, quote, a colossal waste of justice system resources. I know the government members always throw back at us here that they're listening to the victims of crime and not all the experts. But surely they should listen to their own Justice Department.
Honourable member for Cumberland, Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
And we also listen to frontline law enforcement officials from across this country. Officials like President Tom Stamanakis, who said, whether it is by keeping dealers and producers off the streets and out of business, or by serving as a deterrent to potential dealers, this proposed legislation will help our members in doing their jobs and keeping our communities safe. In simple terms, keep these criminals in jail longer, and you take away their opportunity to traffic in drugs. We're going to continue to listen to our frontline law enforcement officers. They're the ones that are dealing with this every day. We're going to stand up to support our police across this country.
Right answer.
Questions and comments? We have the time for a short question and response. The honourable member for Davenport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the subject of overcrowding and double bunking, I just wanted to read something from the Lyle Stewart of the Union of Canadian Correctional Officers. This raises the tensions in institutions where the tension levels are already very high. There's no question that it increases inmate-on-inmate violence, but it also increases the risk when correctional officers open the cell door. Oftentimes that's when an inmate will choose to attack an officer, but now you've got two inmates in there. So the question is, why does this government want to put at risk and endanger correctional officers, correctional service officers?
Honourable member for Cumberland, Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Look, I think we all owe a great debt of gratitude to those people who work in our prisons day in and day out, rehabilitating criminals who are in there and actually protecting our people and keeping them safe. I share the members' concerns, to making sure that we protect these very, very brave Canadians who work in our jail system. And that is why our government is investing in expansion of jails. I actually have two in my riding, one in my hometown of Truro and one in Spring Hill. We are investing in expansion of both those prisons, making sure that we have enough personnel in those buildings, and we actually have the physical space to make sure those people can conduct their jobs safely. We're going to continue to invest in our prison system. We're going to continue to invest in the human resources of the people that work in them.